I'd like to introduce Philip Mulvey. And now Philip is a renowned soil and water chemist, author and visionary in the regenerative land management space. His most recent book, groundbreaking Soil Security and Climate Change, argues powerfully that the future of our climate, agriculture and water systems hinges on what lies beneath our feet. Now, Phil will share his insights into how restoring soil health and the small water cycle can be a game changer for Australia and globally. I hope you enjoy this presentation by Philip Mulvey.
Walter's presentations online, and not one did he mention hydrographs. So I started with hydrographs, didn't I? So it's fascinating because Walter is brilliant at this, and he's a researcher. So Walter brings the seriousness of science. I'm a consultant, so I bring the entertainment of science and a solution at the end of it, regardless of whether you want it or not. So I started 60 years ago, at the end of my science degree, as a professional sailor for a little while. Sorry? Close. So I just want you to have a look at Lake Eyre. It's flooded at the moment. Excuse me. Oh, I have a drinking problem. As I said, I'm flying high. But so does Lake Eyre.
You may have short-circuited the microphone.
So does Lake Eyre. So hang on, I'll take Walter's advice and I'll get a sponge. Oh, it's not big enough. I need a bigger sponge. Oh, because what we're about to talk about is the bigger sponge. So, interesting stats on Lake Eyre. From 1884 to 1984, and there was a mentor of mine, John Delhunty, who did the last research for the Great Dry of 40 years before Lake Eyre got flooded. It went out in 1972 to 74. 8 times in 100 years. 1984 to not this year, you can add another year for this year, 11 times in 40 years. What does that tell you about our land? Bloody hydrographs again. There you go, Walter. So, who's been to a paddock and seen floaters in their paddock? Or driven past land if you're a city person and seen floaters? Who's seen manure patches, little green patches in the dog park? Or, if you're out in the bush, on land itself? That's degraded land. That's a symptom of degradation. The cancer is the hydrograph. The cancer is the water running off the landscape. Sitting there is a series of different hydrographs with different base flows, which we'll talk about as we move into the talk. This is the original photo. There's an edited version on the book cover for greater amplification. But this was done by work led by Professor Lyons back in Murdoch University, which are actually now trying to disclaim some of it. It speaks for itself, doesn't it? What it tells you there is one of the things that Walter didn't talk about, thank God Walter left me something to talk about, is that green, make the land green, is 2 components. It's vegetation and soil. Now, if your land is green, the difference of the relative humidities of the ground and the air is less, so your boundary layer, the layer at which clouds form, is lower. So that means the raindrops that will form and coagulate, which start to fall, hit the ground. Now, who recalls, I grew up in Mudgee. I used to visit Melbourne a lot. We don't have light mists anymore during the winter. We don't have the fogs. We don't have the light rain. We have heavy raindrop rain because our clouds are too high. Or our nucleation from trees is not enough, or our sulfate dust is too much. Or the turbulence caused by wind breaks no longer exists or is greater than 2 kilometres. The basic principles for holding water at source. If it runs, re-infiltrate it. Then work for more rain. Forget the engineering of damming and everything else. We've just heard that is tiddly squat. So let's now talk about songs. Who likes a song? Right, what is in a song? Because a song has at least 3 to 5 people working an instrument and 1 or 2 singers. Now, 2 things can go wrong in a song. And if you listen to Goat's Head Soup by the Stones, you'll hear the guitar break if you actually have a very good hi-fi. And that ping didn't throw everyone off, but 3 or 4 strings breaking would throw everything off. So somebody can perform well and their instruments let them down. But who did rounds as a kid where you do a choir and you go different rounds? You might even do it now. What happens if someone comes in at the wrong time? So the song to work needs each instrument to be tuned and all to be in harmony. So we know what a song is. The landscape has a song. It all has to work individually and it all has to work in harmony. It has the climate, it has the soil, it has the mid-slope, and I went to Martin, who's going to talk later, property. We addressed just the mid-slope, and it has the river. And we have one of the very famous Andrews talking later as well, who will talk about the river. But to get them all to do the right thing for the land, not to show symptoms or cancerous results, you actually need the landscape song to work. I've got a plug, so let's plug, there it is. Let's move on. The central thesis is an actual fact, and Walter talked about it, is the greatest change to climate is what we do with land. The greatest change. And that's totally within our control and no one is talking about it. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do a bit of science. Walter's spoken about this, so I'm going to do it very, very briefly. What he didn't talk about, he leaves me little bits to talk about, just little bits, was that one of the key things associated with clouds is the incoming solar radiation due to albedo effect reflects a lot back out. You increase the clouds, you increase the reflection as well as what comes underneath the infrared. So when people say, oh, increase clouds, it should get hotter, yes, except we're getting less radiation in. If we didn't have that radiation, we'd like Venus, too bloody hot for anything. So we need that clouds. So of the 90, ignoring the albedo that goes off, the 100% that gets through the clouds, 95% does something particular, 4.5% goes deep in the earth, and 0.5% does photosynthesis. So small, 0.5%. The other 95 does 2 things, and they caught up with really stupid physics names. Physics calls something called sensible heat, which is totally illogical. It's not sensible at all, and we'll talk about that. And there's another one they talk about which is called latent heat. Now, every cook in the room, and particularly the bad cooks, their partners, they could be male or female, I'm not going to be discriminative here, but every cook in the room will remember, you put water on, it boils, the temperature never changes until the water's gone. While I'm busy trying to research papers and I cook my soup at lunch, I actually forget, and for a period of time I don't smell the soup being burnt, and the saucepan will start to go red. That's 550 degrees. All the temperature being given off in between, or sorbed at that period, the atoms are like, I grew up with Inspector Gadget with the kids, so my kids are watching Inspector Gadget, and so Inspector Gadget has these arms and legs that go out and out and out. That's what happens, that this energy really goes and it gets stuck in this atom, it's vibrating like all hell, and finally we turn it off, it's got to go, oh, poof, and it pops off a photon. That's long wave radiation. Now, that will keep happening with that saucepan until it melts, and then no further heat will impact it as it's melting at 1100 degrees C. Sensible heat is the least sensible thing you can think about calling it, but that's what it is. Now, latent heat is that bit where you change the state. At the top end of iron melting and down where the water's boiling off, they're both latent heat. The other major thing of latent heat is something that came up as a very interesting experiment. We'll just divert a little bit, and I'll come back to that in a sec. But the way landscape responds with the two heat is totally fascinating. And there's the new paradigm on water written by Mikhail Kravic in Slovenia. These are two examples from it. They can apply readily to Australia. There is another slide coming up on that. But he talks about a water meadow on the left. We don't have water meadows in Australia, but that's a nice green, lush landscape that stock go over during summer. That has 70 to 80% latent heat. The sensible heat is about 10%. They then cleared equivalent land at the same latitude and put it down to wheat. The bare wheat paddock was now 60 to 70% sensible heat. That's a 6 to 7 times flip in that RR code of Walters, times 4. Sorry, the log 4. Power of 4. How much heat is that? Lots. Anyone ever seen one of those IPCC models that has the thing in for this? No. Now, people remember this thing called COVID. The beauty about COVID is there were so many temperature guns left over after COVID they were given to schools. So kids could walk around and run temperature guns and look at things. So the ABC science show reported, middle of COVID, there's kids rushing around with temperature guns. And they said a hot day in Adelaide, 35 degrees in March. The bare ground was 50 to 60. Artificial grass. Why do we have artificial grass for our sports, for our kids running around in the summer playing cricket and wonder why they all don't? I don't want to do this anymore, Dad. It's too damn hot. They're right. We're sitting there reading the paper in the shade in 25. They're out there in 60. That's torture. Natural grass, 25. Notice bitumen is melting, so it hasn't gone up past the bare ground. That's why you walk along the road, compared to the gravel, it's quite warm. You get on the road, it's a little bit cooler, and your thongs stick for a different reason, because you can't get them out of the tar. Now let's talk about the small water cycle. The geography, you all got the big water cycle. The big water cycle is, it evaporates from the oceans, it goes and hits mountain range, except in Australia, we've got a whole different situation for Australia. We can talk about that a bit later if we get the time. And then, so what happens is it rises, and as it rises, it cools. As it cools, you coagulate and aggregate raindrops. It falls onto a slope, it runs down the slope, goes into groundwater through reservoirs, back to sea, and repeats itself. That's the large water cycle. The small water cycle is back to the fact that 85 to 90% of water is reticulated. In Amazon, only 5% of the Amazon River water discharges to the 100% that rains on land. And for 2,500 kilometres inland from the ocean, the small water cycle goes round and round and round and round and round 10 or 20 times, dropping water. The last 2 years, it's the Indian Ocean water coming down from Broome that's providing water for Bourke. Worth thinking about, isn't it? You might have recalled the Townsville floods in 2020. There was a flood in Townsville in 2020 when the Pacific came down and pushed a hell of a lot of rain. It never got past town, just beyond the ranges there, because it was so damn dry inland that the boundary layer just went up. It never got beyond it, but it dropped enough to tickle the biotic pump for the next 200k into the Channel Country. So the following year, it moved right in. The biotic pump is by a Russian in 2007, and I communicate with her. Look, if she was a soil scientist, I remember her name in terms if she was a soil, but when they're people, I forget their names. So I don't know, can't remember her name. Anastasia something or other, but Makarova, Anastasia Makarova. It's brilliant. And she's continuing to write brilliantly. Even yesterday, her post was brilliant. So that's what the small water cycle does. It takes and perpetuates rain, because she just showed, theoretically, rain should not move more than 600 k inland. So you add biology to it, and it goes and goes and goes, providing we don't introduce cancer. So in Australia, it's about 40 to 70% of landscape. It's responsible for the dews, the fogs, the light rain. It's responsible for the summer thunderstorms. It magnifies the big water cycle by at least 5-fold. So I've cut a lot of slides out there, the examples are in the book, but this is sort of an example on a savanna land base, so Africa or Australia, where you've got effectively, if you look down the bottom, the evapotranspiration provides the rainfall for the precipitation that occurs. The more you go in from the coast, the less the cycles is and the greater the extreme events. So you're still going to get extreme events naturally. What happens if we eliminate the vegetation and reduce it? So now we've got tractors and animals and things keeping it down. So you get the perpetuation of the water cycle gets less and less and less reliable, and the extreme events get more increased substantively. So what we see as farmers and land managers is not 1.5 degrees increase in temperature. We have no idea what that means. What that means is we've now gone from 2 droughts in 10 years to 4 or 5 droughts in 10 years, together with 1.5 times more floods. That's what we see. We see a precipitation change and a runoff change. So the small water cycle, you lose it, you increase the heat. You reduce the reliable rain. You increase extreme events, floods and bushfires. One little note in the book that no one's picked up yet, but central and eastern Victoria are 2% of Australia's landmass. They get 30% of our bushfires over 100,000 hectares or somebody dead. They're directly down gradients of the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. The number of fires per decade in central and western Victoria increased and doubled with the introduction of the Murrumbidgee scheme in 1908, 15 years later, and Murrumbidgee Irrigation Scheme 2 in the 1970s. Bushfires have now doubled. Interesting stat. Correlation. Maybe not causation, but it's close. It depopulates rural regions. The best definition of a success of landscape management, though I hate to say it, is the number of church groups. It's the number of kids playing in the local school. It's the number of people staying on the land. That is a healthy landscape. The landscape health song. I don't know, I haven't seen a flash. If I had a flash, nope, good, I'll keep moving. Don't give me a chance. So let's look back. There's 4 things that you can do. You can optimise the small water cycle you've just heard me talk about. You can increase infiltration. You can reduce runoff in ephemeral springs, and you can recharge the alluvium. That's the landscape health song. Climate, soil, mid-slope, river. Kathy Bryant, may not, right. Thank you. You might recognise this. This is a photo from Kathy, which is a supreme photo of regenerative ag. I'd like to see a bit more multi-species pastures at the top, but that's all right, I'll go with this. So what it's showing is root hairs, fungal, aggregation. So let's go into how the landscape health song connects. So what you've got is the root stimulates the bacteria say to the fungi, go out and get us some nutrient. And the fungi goes off and does that because fungi don't produce their own sugar. They've got to be fed. So they've got to work collaboratively. So the fungi bring it back to the bacteria who take it to the root. So that's called a soil biome. But to have a successful soil biome, you've got to also have the organic matter, the living matter we just talked about. So the bottom line we're dealing with is, I got 10 minutes to go and I really get going fast, but the bottom line we're actually dealing with here is calcium, magnesium provide the extensions to hold the organic matter to the mineral matter and stick it. So if you've got the soil right, you then can get the plant right. So you get evaporation, you improve your vegetation, you deepen your soil, and lo and behold, you change your climate. I didn't talk about mid-slope. There's only so much I can put in one slide. So what can we do to manage the land to promote rain? We need to increase latent heat. That's the green, but in actual fact, it's the browny green, because we'll talk about that in a sec, because if you don't have deep organic matter, then you can't hold the water to keep the plants going during a long dry season. Who's heard of topsoil? Okay, from now on I want you to talk about a horizon, because topsoil people view as only 6 inches, and it limits their thinking to just the top. A horizon means that's where you've got aggregated soil which plants can rely upon before you go to mottling. I've seen A horizons go from 25 mil to 0.8 of a metre, 800 mil in 8 years. So let's talk a little bit of science. That's the return of the... sorry, I probably didn't cover the rest there. We have to manage infiltration. The difference between, and I'm going to run some examples in a sec, but you can actually have a 4 mil rainfall onto a heavy clay soil and get nothing in. That same aggregated soil, you can have a 6-inch rainfall in a 2-hour period and get the whole lot in. That infiltration is essential. So there's 2 parts. Notice I poured the water in the wrong spot. That's bad infiltration. I got great hydration. I can store a lot down here. I'm an old man. I go to the toilet a lot, but I've got to get it into me. So this storing bit is actually what's called aggregation. It's the plant available water. So you've got 2 bits. You've got to get it in and you've got to store it. Managing the mid-slope is really interesting because it deals with springs, changes in slope, how water comes out and how to get water in. That's a whole discussion in itself. I'm not too sure, Martin, if you're picking up any of that. Are you picking up any of that? Okay, well, in that case, I won't talk about it. And then finally, manage the stream bed rehydration. I'm a hydrogeologist, so I'm going to take a little bit of later talks thunder, just a little bit here, as I go into the science behind it all. Us scientists make things really hard. Now, pH, who's done chemistry at school, you know what pH is? It's a weird thing called the negative log of hydrogen activity. It's not even hydrogen concentration, it's hydrogen activity. Now, PF is the negative log of matrix potential, which is the combined suction exerted by water and salt. People forget the salt bit, but by water and salt. So if you look at a PF of 2, that's a negative 100 millibar. So that is the point at which water drains from your soil, roughly speaking, right? If you look at 4.2, that's permanent wilting point. Farmers will know what that is. That's when your plant goes, And this is actually a really hard concept to get. But what I want you to simply understand is simply the fact that that bit between those 2 dotted lines horizontally is what's available to plants, roughly speaking. Now, the green line is the aggregated line. The light orange and the dark orange are the two extremes of clay, and the dark orange brown is that's associated with sand. So sand drains freely, so it has a lot of going straight through it, which you can see that goes beyond field capacity, drains off. It's got very little there you can suck out. So the bit in between is roughly 6 on 40. So it's down about, 15%. So if you look at the clay is 17 at 50, and it's roughly 15% as well. But it actually has way more in the small pores up there beyond permanent wilting point. If you aggregate them both with lots of organic matter, you move them to the green. And the green is roughly 32 on 42, so about 75% of the water that you can get into the soil is now available to the plant. On the right, we have a handsome-looking bloke, that's not me. On the left, we have his lovely-looking daughter. These paddocks are 30 metres apart. One has been subject to 20 to 30 multi-species pastures with scratches. We can talk about scratches later, but that's a type of tool called a soil key. And on the left is just set grazing. That's the infiltration of a 20 mil rainfall just last week. This is the interesting stats out of it. If you have a rye and clover, depth 100 mil on a hectare, and you're using with 1/7 of the plant available water, because this is basalt country, you've got 50 tonnes per hectare. After 4 years of soil key on multi-species pastures with crash grazing, we've got 1,100 tonnes per hectare. At 8 years, we've got 1,760 tonnes per hectare and can survive 2 years of drought. That's our A horizon, not our topsoil. Language matters because it opens the possibility for you to consider you can build aggregation through hard clay soil, and this is hard clay, shitty soil. This example to some depth. The basalt is hard clay, but it's very nice fertile soil. So you promote the biota to promote aggregation. Walter's already talked about it. You have to increase the infiltration rate, but you do that by promoting the biota, but also you increase roughage across the land. So things like soil key that just tickle and scratch the land are things that do that. Organic matter is one of the two answers to dispersive and slakive soils. It's one of the two answers to hard setting. One's chemical, one's natural. Seems to be the way of everything these days, doesn't it? So organic matter actually produces a much better outcome. Yeah, that's 2 minutes. So luckily I've got people coming up later, but just briefly want to talk about the science of getting water in an alluvium. So what you've got here is that the alluvium has 30% nothing, as Walter says, 30% porosity. The weathered rock beneath it has 5% porosity, and the basal rock has 1% or less porosity. The river will cut down to the weathered rock, and if really bad, right through the weathered rock. So now you've got no storage in the alluvium. So when you restore it, we're going to hear a lot more about that later, and you restore the soil above it, which is what the Mulloon Institute has yet to do at Mulloon, you actually have a situation where your runoff drops to less than 5%, your infiltration goes to 95%, you're flooding the alluvium and you're flooding the landscape. So you're actually able to store the water in the alluvium, which is the subsoil beneath our A horizon. So, back to hydrographs. The first one, point 1, is what happened at Orange, where a number of people died. It was the 6th biggest rainfall event and by far the worst flood. And in the last 2 decades, the land around Orange has gone from mixed farming to fundamentally cropping. This was at Yagara. So around Yarra, not so much Orange, my apologies to those people from Orange. So then you've got where you restore the river system. Then you restore the river system and the mid-slope. And finally, you've got the restore the whole landscape song. So you create basal river flow. You change the quality of what gets to the river, and you change what's opportunity for the biota. So let's just run how's the things available for regenerative ag that's changing the way we approach it. Multi-species pastures, yes, but there's the new types of machines that are coming. We can now do seed sorting. We can plant 5 crops at once into the one paddock. And we can seed sort 6 times. We've got to take the weeds out as well and the trash. So we can plant wheat, oats, beans and radishes and harvest them at once and seed sort and still make more money than we did if we put herbicides out and fertiliser, because we're fertilising as we go. And the other one is the scratches. And I'll finish up because I don't want to get the gong even further. Unlike Africa, Australia depends on scratches. And I'll just very simply take you to an example from the gardening, Australia Gardening. Costa's not in the audience, but I watched the program, and they had a little episode about 5 months ago in Perth, and they had an area they cut off from foxes and cats, and after a decade or so all the vegetation came back and the small mammals that they put in. Then they had an area in the centre that they cut off from the small mammals. That area had worse vegetation than the area outside. It had a smaller A horizon than the area outside. Scratches are essential for fungi, particularly the primary wood degraders. Walter talked about one type of fungi which cracks rock. The other one is what's known as the lignin degraders, cellulose degraders, which are your wood rot fungi. They don't live with roots. They need to be covered a bit, and they need lots of high C to N ratio. Scratches do that.